The young man you're looking at right now is named Deng Yanqiang. He's 24 years old and from China. Lately, things haven't been going too well for him. On July 9th, Ukraine's intelligence agency announced that Deng was a Chinese spy. And he wasn't arrested alone. His father, Deng Zewa, was taken in too. Apparently, Ukraine's security services had been watching this father and son for quite a while. According to them, Deng Yanqiang was a Chinese international student at a university in Kiev. But in 2023, he got expelled for poor academic performance. Even after that, he didn't leave the country. He stayed in Kiev, and during that time, he started gathering intelligence on Ukraine's military. So what kind of info was he after? Well, Ukraine has a missile called Neptune, and Deng was trying to collect technical data about it. To get his hands on this, he actually hired a Ukrainian citizen who worked in weapons development to help him gather classified materials. But just as he was about to pass that information along to someone outside the country, he got caught. Now, Ukrainian intelligence clearly chose their timing carefully. Deng's father had just flown in from China on July 7th. We still don't know whether he came to rescue his son after hearing about the arrest, or if it was just a normal visit. What we do know is that he doesn't normally live in Ukraine. He's based in China. On July 8th, the father went to the Chinese embassy, and the very next day, July 9th, he too was arrested. It seems he didn't realize how serious things were. Ukraine's intelligence officials are saying his visit to the embassy looked like he was coordinating with Chinese authorities. So now, both father and son are being treated as spies. The agency also seized their phones, and from the messages they recovered, it's clear the two were in close contact. Their father and son. Of course they talk. But it also seems they were working together pretty tightly in this espionage operation. Reports even suggest the father was remotely directing his son's intelligence gathering activities. After the story broke, on July 10th, China's foreign ministry held a press conference. A reporter asked Mao Ning what she thought about the situation. 2 Chinese nationals being arrested as spies in Ukraine. Her response? We're currently verifying the situation. If they are Chinese citizens, we will protect their lawful rights. And that's about all she said. Not much detail beyond that.
法新社提问：乌克兰昨天表示已拘留2位中国公民，指控他们试图将导弹技术走私出境。请问中方对此有何评论？
我们还在核实了解有关情况。如果涉及中国公民，我们也会依法维护好中国公民的合法权益。
But once this story was picked up and widely reported by international media, it sparked a strong reaction overseas. A lot of people started criticizing the Chinese government, saying things like, the CCP has no conscience, or how could they bite the hand that fed them? Why would people say that? Well, because back when China was just getting its military industry off the ground, Ukraine actually helped out a lot. Take China's aircraft carriers, for example. Everyone knows China now has 3 carriers. The first one is the Liaoning, right? But that wasn't originally built by China. It was actually a Soviet-era ship, built in Ukraine. And back then it was called the Varyag. The Soviet Union collapsed before it was finished. So the Varyag was just sitting there, unfinished. Then China came along and bought it for around 20 million RMB. They shipped it back home, studied it, modified it, and eventually turned it into the Liaoning, China's very first aircraft carrier. And that's how China learned to build its own. And that's just one example. Let's talk about jet engines. China had always struggled with developing advanced aircraft engines. It was a major weakness. But later on, with help from Ukrainian engineers and tech, China managed to close the gap with the US and Russia in that field too. Actually, after the Soviet Union fell apart, Ukraine was left with a bunch of military factories and highly trained engineers who were basically out of a job. China saw the opportunity and brought many of those Ukrainian military experts over to help develop its own defense technology. So, yeah, Ukraine really played a big part in boosting China's military capabilities. Fast forward to today, and Ukraine is at war with Russia. Everyone knows that China has clearly taken Russia's side. Not only has China not supported Ukraine, but now Ukraine's accusing China of sending spies to steal its missile technology during an active war, no less. Now, about that missile. The one Deng Yanqiang was allegedly trying to steal intel on is called the Neptune. It's actually an upgraded version of an old Soviet missile called the Uran. Ukraine improved it with better electronics and fuel, giving it a range of up to 360 kilometers. Pretty impressive. The Neptune missile is considered one of Ukraine's most powerful weapons. Back in April 2022, it really made headlines. Russia's flagship in the Black Sea, the Moskva, was hit by 2 Neptune missiles while anchored at night, and it sank, just like that. That was a historic moment. Since World War II, no warship over 10,000 tons had ever been sunk in combat. And no fleet's flagship had ever been taken out like that either. So the Neptune didn't just make history, it became a national icon for Ukraine. Later in 2023, Ukraine even developed a land attack version of the Neptune. Reports say it was used to destroy a Russian S-400 air defense system in Crimea. So yeah, for Ukraine, this missile is clearly top secret, high-value military tech, which makes the whole espionage case that much more serious. So after this story came out, a lot of people started pointing fingers, saying that China had sent spies to Ukraine to steal military technology. But once the news made the rounds, quite a few folks online began raising doubts about the whole thing. What kind of doubts? First, the Neptune missile is considered highly advanced by Ukrainian standards. But some people pointed out that it's actually based on an old Soviet missile called the Uran, developed way back between 1983 and 1995, so we're talking over 30 years ago. But China had already imported that exact missile system from the Soviets back in the day. They renamed it the YJ-21, or Eagle Strike 21. But that model, China already retired it. They don't even use it anymore. So people are asking, why would China bother trying to steal outdated missile tech it once had and doesn't even want now? What's more, when it comes to missile technology, China is already way ahead globally. For years, China couldn't compete with the US across the board in military power, so it focused on dominating specific areas. And one of those areas was missiles. Back when the US and Russia signed the INF Treaty to stop developing mid-range missiles, China wasn't part of that deal. So they went all in, developing missile systems like crazy. And that strategy paid off. Because missiles involve fewer restricted technologies and fewer bottlenecks, China made huge strides. After decades of progress, China's missile capabilities are now considered on par with the US, maybe even ahead in some areas. Remember that recent negotiation between US official Bigun and China's He Lifeng? They talked about trade imbalances, and when China said the US won't sell them advanced chips, Bigun responded, "Well, how about you sell us your missiles then?" Half joking, but also telling. It was a nod to how advanced China's missile tech has become. So really, why would China need to steal 30-year-old missile plans from Ukraine? It just doesn't add up. Then there's the second issue. Even if there were technical documents, they'd most likely be digital. But the Ukrainian report says this young man was caught with a paper document, just one sheet. And that's suspicious too. When the intelligence agency released the news, they showed a blurred out image of the paper in his hands. We couldn't see what it said, but just looking at it, it didn't seem like any kind of detailed military blueprint. If it were real schematics, you'd expect stacks or boxes of documents, not just one page, right? Finally, there's the question of who China supposedly sent. If you're going to spy on a foreign country's top secret missile program, would you really use a 24-year-old college dropout who'd already been expelled from school? That just doesn't sound like a well-trained intelligence operative. You'd expect someone with military training, or at least some credentials. This kid doesn't seem to meet any of the typical criteria for a spy. So people started saying, maybe Ukraine got it wrong. Maybe this is a case of mistaken identity, or just an overblown story. In fact, folks online started digging and found that this father-son duo might not be spies at all, but rather international arms traders, or resellers, if you will. What were they dealing in? Bits and pieces of weapons, missile fragments, and other war memorabilia from the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Turns out, they even had social media accounts, one on Bilibili and another one on Xianyu. They weren't exactly flying under the radar.
大家好，今天我们来开箱一下英国的文物的一部分的那个硫磺石导弹 brimstone。基本上就是一个圆柱形啊，里面还有点渣。倒过来看看。
So why exactly did this guy get arrested and accused of being a spy? Well, apparently he slipped up. It seems like he either bought or somehow got hold of a tail fin from a Ukrainian Neptune missile and turned it into a luggage tag. Then he tried to sell it. Not on TikTok, but on Xianyu, China's second-hand marketplace app. That's when Ukrainian authorities stepped in and arrested him, saying he was engaged in espionage. Curious about this, I did some digging. And yeah, this guy does have an account on Bilibili, and it's still up. His whole channel is basically a showcase of all the war trophies he's collected in Ukraine. In one of his videos, he shows off a room filled with military helmets, missile and rocket launch tubes, and even unexploded bomb fragments just lying around. It's clear this guy's been roaming Ukraine, collecting battlefield debris like it's his full-time job. In one particular video, he shows a piece of wreckage from a Su-30 fighter jet, one of Russia's planes that was shot down recently over Ukraine. He even managed to get one of the engine turbine blades. It looked almost brand new. He points out the carbon buildup and everything, doing an unboxing video like it's some collector's item. He shows off different components, naming each part as he opens the package. And it doesn't stop there. He also had fragments from British missiles, like the Storm Shadow missile that the UK sent to Ukraine. He had nose cones, tail fins, outer skins, you name it. The guy's a total military gear junkie. And what did he do with all of it? He sold it, right on Xianyu. I checked out his listings, and he had a wide variety of stuff. One category was military apparel, camouflage uniforms, hats, gear. Some were from the Ukrainian military, others from the Russian side. And they weren't cheap. A hat for 200 RMB, a tactical belt for 1,600, and even plain military shirts going for 700 or 800 RMB. Then there was the other category, battlefield collectibles. Like, for instance, he'd take the carbon fiber shell of a drone and turn it into a keychain. He'd do the same with parts of missiles or aircraft. A piece of the Su-30's skin, boom, keychain. A tail fin from a missile, turn it into a luggage tag. And this stuff wasn't going for pocket change either. A single piece could go for 800 to 1,000 RMB, sometimes more. And this wasn't just a recent hustle. He's been selling stuff like this for nearly a decade. Of course, before the war in Ukraine, who knows what kind of collectibles he was dealing with. But ever since the war broke out, his focus clearly shifted to battlefield items. My guess? He probably got his hands on a Neptune missile tail fin, turned it into a keychain or luggage tag, and tried to sell it online. On his Bilibili channel, there's even a full video showing how he makes these tags, step by step. He likely hired someone locally in Ukraine to help with the actual manufacturing. They'd take drone or missile fragments, cut them down, and turn them into flashy souvenirs. And he wasn't giving them away either. These custom keychains were selling for around 1,600 RMB apiece. Pretty steep. Honestly, it looks like this guy made a good chunk of money doing this. Probably a lot more than he ever would have made finishing college. But honestly, I think this guy might be a little bit unlucky. Maybe even wrongfully accused. Why do I say that? Because dealing in military surplus and war memorabilia is actually a pretty well-established niche market, especially among hardcore military enthusiasts around the world. Just go on eBay or any number of dedicated websites. People are selling everything from spent shell casings and bullet cartridges to tank tread links. It's all out there. Collectors love this stuff. I remember back when I went to Ukraine for an interview, someone even gave me a shell casing. Massive, really heavy. I was just out reporting, and someone standing nearby handed it to me as a souvenir. I brought it back to Japan. Someone else gave me a thinner casing too. For military buffs, anything connected to war is worth collecting. One time, I was reporting at a farm just outside Kiev. There had been heavy fighting in that area. Artillery units on both sides had been exchanging fire. The Russians had occupied a lumber yard nearby. And when I visited that lumber yard later on, the staff showed me how Russian soldiers had been living there. Even the old security guard at the gate invited me into his little room and opened a drawer. Inside, it was full of shell casings he'd collected off the ground when he came back after the fighting. Spent bullets, even a few live rounds. I asked him for one, but he wouldn't part with it. He treated them like treasure. because all this stuff can be sold for good money. So for military collectors, anything left behind from a war zone is fair game. That's exactly the kind of business this young guy was running. He was catering to Chinese military fans. And when I looked at prices for similar items internationally, I found something interesting. His prices were way higher than what people charge abroad. I mean, a simple keychain for 1,600 RMB. That's steep. Even a basic army cap for 200 RMB. That's a bit outrageous. So yeah, the guy was definitely marking things up. But here's the thing. This whole space lives in a grey area. During wartime, selling these kinds of items is definitely more sensitive. If the war were over and you were scavenging leftovers from abandoned battlefields, maybe it wouldn't be a big deal. But in an active conflict, grabbing and flipping war relics, especially things like missile fragments or aircraft parts, blurs the line between collectibles and classified materials. And let's not forget, sometimes this line gets dangerously thin. Take the famous case from the Yugoslav War, when NATO shot down a US F-117 stealth fighter. Rumors spread that China managed to get a piece of its radar-absorbing skin. Some even said the US bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade to force the handover, and China refused. So a missile took out the building. Now, that version of events is heavily debated. But one thing that's more widely accepted is this. China did, at some point, acquire a piece of that F-117, and it played a major role in advancing China's stealth aircraft program. That kind of thing changes the game. So now, think about this kid again, selling pieces of a Neptune missile or parts from a Su-30 jet engine. You have to ask, is this just harmless military memorabilia, or are we creeping into intelligence territory? Legally, it's murky. In peacetime, maybe it's just edgy commerce. But in wartime, the stakes are very different. Right now, Ukraine has officially charged this father and son under Article 114, Clause 2 of Ukraine's criminal code, espionage. And this isn't just a case of suspected spies anymore. In the official announcement, they're already labeled as spies. According to Ukrainian law, they could be sentenced to 15 years in prison and have all their assets confiscated. That's serious. Think about it. Just for selling some military souvenirs, this guy could end up doing 15 years. That feels pretty harsh, right? What makes it even more ironic is that this young man was actually a supporter of Ukraine. After the Russia-Ukraine war broke out, he didn't stay silent. He posted tons of pro-Ukraine content on his Bilibili channel. In 2023, around the time he got expelled from university and had more free time, he even said he wanted to join the Ukrainian army to fight against Russia. He openly criticized Chinese citizens who went to fight on Russia's side and said he wanted to join Ukraine's International Legion, a volunteer force where you don't even need to speak Ukrainian to join. He was serious about it. But maybe at some point he realized selling military gear was a better deal than fighting on the front lines. So he doubled down on his battlefield souvenir business, scouring Ukraine for war relics and having his father help ship the items back to China, where they sold them on Jianyu. What he didn't expect was that one of those sales would bring him a disaster. And his case reminded me of another Chinese national in Ukraine, Wang Jixian. We actually interviewed Wang when we were in Ukraine. He was a Chinese engineer living in Odessa. When the war started, he didn't evacuate. He stayed. And not only did he stay, he stood with the Ukrainian people, recording their daily resilience, talking about how strong they were, and saying the Russian invasion wouldn't shake their lives. He became a key figure for documenting the experience of Chinese citizens during the war, posting videos about daily life, air raid sirens, and missile strikes. He'd even film incoming attacks and upload the footage to YouTube. But shortly after we interviewed him, something strange happened. In October 2023, Wang suddenly disappeared. People started messaging me, "Hey Wang Ju, did you hear?" Wang Jixian is missing. I started asking around, trying to find out what happened. But at the time, no one wanted to talk. Everything was confidential. Then in November, it came out. Wang had been arrested by Ukraine's intelligence and security services. Why? Because he had filmed and uploaded videos during missile attacks in April, July, and August of that year. Russian missiles had been targeting Odessa, and Ukraine's air defense systems were launching interceptors in response. Wang had filmed those from his balcony and shared them online. The Ukrainian authorities said that by doing so, he may have unintentionally exposed the positions of Ukraine's air defense units, critical military locations. That kind of footage, they argued, could help Russian forces adjust their targeting. And in wartime, that's not just careless. That's a serious offense, possibly even aiding the enemy. So in the end, Wang Jixian was thrown into a Ukrainian jail. Whether it was for leaking classified information or actual espionage, we still don't know. But he was locked up. And according to Wang himself, he suffered badly in prison. He said Ukrainian guards beat him regularly, injected him with unknown substances, and forced him to sign documents he couldn't even understand. He just couldn't believe what was happening. After all, he had been so supportive of Ukraine, only to end up imprisoned by the very country he stood with. Desperate, he reached out to the Chinese embassy in Ukraine for help. And that's where things got awkward. Back when he was still free, Wang had fiercely criticized the Chinese government for not supporting Ukraine. As a result, all of his accounts in China had been shut down. He'd post online, calling out the CCP constantly. But when trouble hit, he had no choice but to ask the same government he once condemned to rescue him. Whether the Chinese embassy helped him or not is unclear. But what we do know is that after 50 days in detention, Wang Jixian was eventually released. Now think about it. Doesn't his story sound a lot like Deng Yancheng's? Both of them were clearly pro-Ukraine. Neither seemed like professional spies. But both ended up being arrested in Ukraine, accused of espionage, because of what could be seen as careless behavior during wartime. In fact, before Deng got arrested, someone even warned him on Bilibili. They said, "Hey kid, be careful with those military items you're dealing with. Don't forget what happened to that guy named Wang. He got caught, sentenced, even though it was just a suspended sentence." But Deng laughed it off. He even replied sarcastically, "I wish your whole family could be this happy," meaning he thought he was untouchable, that nothing would happen to him. And then, boom. Not long after that, he was arrested and charged with espionage. And if convicted, he could face 15 years in prison. So is he a victim of injustice? Honestly, maybe. From where I stand, I don't think Deng and his father were Chinese spies. They were probably just making money off military collectibles. But that kind of business caught the attention of Ukraine's intelligence agencies. And from their point of view, it looked like a national security threat. Now, to be fair, we can't say Ukraine's security services are totally overreacting either. You can't assume something isn't a state secret just because the technology is outdated. For example, North Korea's military tech is definitely behind the curve. But if you go to North Korea and start filming their warships or take pictures of their new stealth corvette, or whatever they're calling it now, you'll absolutely get arrested. Maybe even executed. Even if the tech is old, it's still classified. That's the logic behind secrecy. Even letting outsiders know how far behind you are is risky. Because once your enemy understands the limits of your tech, they stop fearing you. That's a strategic vulnerability. So no, you can't judge whether something is espionage purely by how advanced the tech is. If you pick up a piece of a missile, mail it back to China, and that missile is considered classified, that's enough to trigger espionage charges. So is Deng innocent? In some ways, yes. He probably didn't mean any harm. He was just trying to make a buck, flipping battlefield relics. But is he also guilty, legally speaking? Probably. He did break the law, even if he didn't realize just how serious the consequences would be. At the end of this episode, I just want to share a few thoughts. During the Russia-Ukraine war, nothing is ever a small matter. I've been to Ukraine myself to report on the conflict. This was a few years ago, not long after the war had broken out. I still remember it clearly. We were issued official press credentials by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, which allowed us to travel through the country and even report from frontline zones. But with those credentials came a very strict set of rules. What were the rules? No filming of military vehicles, no tanks, no military installations, not even checkpoints or the soldiers manning them. Absolutely nothing related to active operations or defense. And as we drove toward the front lines, I remember tanks rolling right past us, one after another. I actually shot a few quick clips on my phone. Later, during editing, our producer asked, "Can we use this footage?" And I said, "Better not." Why? Because what if they saw it later and accused us of espionage? What if someday I returned to Ukraine and they arrested me, saying, "Hey, you filmed our tanks"? I mean, what would I even say to defend myself? So yeah, even though we captured the footage, we didn't use it. We respected the rules. Because in wartime, everything is sensitive. And you have to understand that. People are fighting for their survival. They're bound to be extremely cautious. I think that's perfectly reasonable. That's the first point. Now, when it comes to the arrests of Deng Yanqiang, his father, or even Wang Jixian, was Ukraine acting purely out of military concern? Or were there political motives too? It's hard to say. If we look at it purely from a security standpoint, arresting that father and son duo and potentially sentencing them to 15 years in prison, honestly, it feels excessive. They were just flipping battlefield souvenirs on Xianyu and posting a few videos on Bilibili, trying to make some money, that's all. I really don't believe they were spies. No country would send people that unqualified on an actual espionage mission. It just doesn't add up. But we also can't ignore the broader geopolitical context. China's position on the Russia-Ukraine war has been vague, walking a tightrope, not fully siding with Ukraine, and certainly not condemning Russia outright. That ambiguity frustrates Ukraine. Look at President Zelensky. He's traveled all over the world asking for support, but he never came to China. And Ukraine has repeatedly criticized China for its perceived alignment with Russia. So is it possible that these arrests were also meant as a message to the Chinese government? A way of saying, you're not backing us? Fine. Your citizens in Ukraine won't have it easy either. We don't know for sure. But it's not out of the question. And that's what makes this story so complicated. So if you're a Chinese national living in Ukraine, you really need to be extremely cautious. Supporting Ukraine doesn't automatically mean Ukrainians will welcome you with open arms. That's a mistake both Wang Jixian and Deng Yanqiang seem to have made. They genuinely supported Ukraine. Wang even publicly criticized China and praised the Ukrainian resistance. Deng posted videos, claimed he wanted to join the Ukrainian army. But both of them stepped over invisible lines and ended up arrested, accused of espionage. I've been to Ukraine myself during the war, and even as a journalist, with official press credentials issued by the Ministry of Defense, we were told, no filming military vehicles, no checkpoints, no soldiers, no tanks, nothing. I remember tanks rolling by us as we traveled toward the front lines. I filmed a bit on my phone. Later, during editing, someone asked if we should use the footage. I said no, because if I ever go back to Ukraine and they accuse me of filming sensitive military activity, what would I say? In wartime, there are no small mistakes. Yes, Ukraine is the victim in this war, but it's also a country with serious corruption. I've said it before. Go through customs without slipping some money, and they'll give you a hard time. Wang Jixian said he was tortured in prison. Eventually, he had to pay money, admit guilt, and was sentenced to 5 years, though with 1 year of probation. That's how it works in places like this. You get caught up in something, and the only way out is to pay your way out. This isn't unique to Ukraine. Most former Soviet countries are similar. Corruption runs deep. The Soviet legacy is still everywhere. And if you land in their legal system, you're extremely vulnerable. Don't count on the Chinese government to help you either. If you're a real spy, maybe they'll intervene. But if you're just a civilian caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, forget it. That wolf warrior passport-waving rescue fantasy, that only happens in movies. Even when we were in Ukraine, Chinese students told us, the idea that China will come to save you, that's just fiction. In a war zone, you can only rely on yourself. You have to be mindful of your actions. Set clear boundaries. Don't cross into gray areas, even unintentionally. Because once you lose your protected status, once you're seen as a threat, you're on your own. And again, this isn't just about Ukraine. Russia too. Recently, Chinese nationals were arrested there for trying to ship home spent bullets, casings, and World War II era medals. Even souvenirs like officers' swords can get you detained. These countries are not governed by strong rule of law systems. They're unpredictable, and the risks are real. So if you're working, studying, or doing business in a war-torn region, don't take chances. Stay within the lines. Don't assume goodwill protects you. Sometimes one wrong move is all it takes. That's all I wanted to share today. Thank you.
也许中国的护照不能让你去到世界上的任何一个地方，但是中国的护照可以把你从世界上任何一个地方带回来。
比如说，将来再发生撤侨的事情的时候，
能自己承认自己承认，等不到明天自个儿审，我绝对不会等，绝对不会。这样和那电影一样啊，就那些情景真的，我真是想说，电影什么是电影？国内网友说我们是太难伺候了，兄弟你明白技术是，让你等1星期，你等不来彻底的那一天，你来试试。
看这有没有这个剩下的炮弹啊，炮弹壳啊。没有弹壳。那这个地方保存的还是相对比较完整。也算是进了一把俄军的坦克。哎呀，俄军就死在里面，是吧？估计打成这样，我估计人没有可能生存。